just about to start with our next speaker. Mary Lynn was so nice to accept our invitation. She's a very interesting person. She co-authored 2 popular books on change, The Fearless Change and More Fearless Change. She wrote those 2 with Linda Rising, and she collaborated with Linda very often on her jobs, etc. So I think if you want to ask Mary Lynn anything about change, she'll never say no. So, Mary Lynn.
Hi, everyone. You know how speakers always start. They say, let me share my screen. So I won't disappoint you in that. I will share the screen with you.
And you can ask any questions in the chat, and at the end we'll have quite some time, so I'll try to ask them back to Mary Lynn.
Okay. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the introduction. That's true, I love to talk about change. So thank you for inviting me to talk about my favorite topic, and special thanks to the organizers. I speak at a lot of conferences and places, and they did such a good job of promoting it and organizing it. So thank you to them. Excuse me. I ate some almonds right before this, not a smart move. But anyway, most of all, thank you to all of you for the best gift that you're giving me, which is the gift of your time. I'm so glad you're here. And I wanted to start with a preview of upcoming attractions here. The preview of upcoming attractions is, the topic is making Agile happen. Where do you start? And you start with the people. So we're going to talk a lot about the people, the sometimes annoying people, the sometimes delightful people, but the people who need to make Agile happen. So that's the perspective I'm taking. Sorry, I'm having a little problem with my screen here. All right. So who is this person in the front of the room other than somebody who has a problem with her screen? This is the person, my name is Mary Lynn Manns, that was on the first slide, and I am the co-author of Fearless Change book and the More Fearless Change book. I was co-author with Linda Rising, who spoke at Agile100, I believe in 2020. It's delightful to work with her. I continue to work with her. We wrote our first book, and after 10 years of research of interviewing people who were making change happen. So we spent many years talking with people who were many different kinds of people, many different ages of people, many different ranks of people, from people who had young people who had just joined organizations, to middle managers, to CEOs, all kinds of people in different kinds of organizations in different countries. And what we asked when we talked with these people who were trying to make change happen, we said, what did you do? Tell us your story. What did you do? So the second thing I want you to know about me is I am a bottom line person. I want to know what people did. That's what I like collecting, are the specific strategies that people can use. So what you're going to get today in the next 30 minutes of your life here is you're going to learn some strategies, and we call them patterns because these are techniques that we heard over and over and over again in the interviews. So when we did an interview in perhaps Argentina and we heard about a particular strategy, we thought that was nice and we wrote it down. But we waited until we heard it again, and maybe we heard it again when we were in Florida, and we said, oh, look, we've heard that again. And then later we heard it from another company in another location. And we said, wow, that strategy must really work. So instead of calling them strategy, we call them patterns, which is something that repeats, that you know works. So I'm going to talk to you about patterns, and you can put these in your toolbox for making change happen. And just like any other toolbox, you have them there and you use them when you need them. I don't have a lot of time to cover a lot of them, but I'm going to give you a few and then point you to a place where you can learn more. So, but let's talk about you. I'm assuming you are here because you are making change happen. Good. Love it. So I'm wondering, is that going splendidly well for you? I'm guessing if I asked in the chat, let me know if everything's going perfectly, I wouldn't have anybody respond. I bet you discovered, though, that the root of every challenge, if you looked at the root of every challenge, it's the people. Even when you have problems with technology, you can look at the root as being the people. So if you recall on my first slide, that's what we're going to talk about, is the people. So making change happen, where do you start? The people, some of them are probably resisting. Some of them are probably driving you a bit crazy. What I observed from the interviews that we did is the big mistake that people made was thinking about the processes, the tools, how we're going to do Agile, with the assumption that because Agile is so wonderful, that people will just jump on board and love it. It's interesting that the Agile manifesto says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. But those individuals are so difficult. So at times, not always. So what can we do? So let's take a minute to think about that. What we usually start with when we're trying to convince people that Agile is wonderful is we give them the facts. And we often start with what you want to do. This is the part of Agile that we're working on now. Or we want to bring Agile and you're just starting out into the organization. And the outcome you expect. So those are the kind of things that we talk about, and that's a good first start. The trouble is that's where a lot of us stop. But before we go any further, I'd like you to please take a minute and do that. So I'd like you to think about the facts that you give people when you want them to change to Agile. So I'll just give you a minute or two. We don't have a lot of time, but I kind of want to put your headspace into this. What are the things that I'm telling people? The change that we want to make and the outcome that we expect. You can take a minute to jot that down on paper. In fact, I'll cover my face for a minute here so you can. So I know we don't have a lot of time. This is not a workshop. If it were, we could take more time, but just look at what you wrote. Look at what you wrote and think about, how do people react when you give them the facts? How do people react when you give them the facts? I'm betting you see these kind of things. You see some people who are happy, some people who give you the thumbs up. Other people are confused. Other people are angry. Other people are like, oh my gosh, don't give me another change. Other people are surprised. And what are you talking about? So when we talk about the facts, I want you to think about, if you will, please, the last time someone gave you some facts about something that you did not agree with. And they were giving you information about something that you didn't want to hear because you didn't agree with it. Is this the way you reacted? Yes. Yippee, you told me something that goes against what I believe. Oh, yippee, I found out I was wrong. Or yippee, you are allowing me to see the light. That's not normally the way the people react when you give them some well-organized facts about something that they don't want to hear. Normally, the way people react is something like this. So you have this going on, this one-way communication, and you are the person on the left because you don't want to hear it. So this person is giving you information and you don't want to hear it. So when you're giving the facts that you just wrote on a piece of paper or thought about in the previous slide, this is the way a lot of people are reacting. So let's see if we can change that. Now they're reacting this way because they're pushing back. They're pushing back. And if there's one thing I learned in the last few years, that one person's truth is not another person's truth. Now you could argue the facts are the facts, but if you watched our election, our presidential election in America, you know that one person's truth is not another person's truth. In fact, okay, prepare yourself. I heard somebody say this on TV the other day about the pandemic, which again is another example how one person's truth is not another. But someone said this: science is not fact. It is meant to be challenged. Now we could do a whole presentation about those two sentences. When I heard it, I just paused and thought about it for a long time. But it's an example of how one person's truth is not another person's truth. There's also something called the backfire effect, which some of you may have heard about because it's a proven psychological principle, which says that if you're giving somebody information that they don't want to hear, they tend to dig in their heels even deeper and believe stronger in what they believe. Because after all, there's no reward in admitting they're wrong. So they dig in their heels and say, no, 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 I believe what I believe. And also, thirdly, there's the influence of the tribe. Some of you may have read the famous book, Tribe, but the group to which you belong to has more influence on you than your search for the truth. So if you have a group of people who are against Agile or any small change you want to make, what they believe is going to have more influence. The people that they belong to will have more influence than their interest in actually seeking the truth. And finally, but not exhaustively, rethinking takes time. I mean, you believe what you believe. Do you really want to take the time to search for flaws in your own argument? That takes a lot of time. So this is just some of the reasons. It's not an exhaustive list, but this is some of the reasons why when you give facts, people give you pushback. So what we have to do is we have to give the facts. I'm not saying we shouldn't give the facts and work with how people feel about the facts. How people feel about the facts. I know what you're thinking. Oh no, she's going to talk about feelings. But stick with me, because all the decisions that I make and you make and we all make are based on what we hear and see, the facts, and how we feel about the facts. So hang in there with me. All right, so the first strategy or pattern I want to talk about is emotional connection. Making an emotional connection with people is more difficult in the workplace than in your personal lives. So let's talk about how we can do this in the workplace. What we're striving for is not just a logical connection. Yes, we need to give them the facts, but also go a step further and give them an emotional connection too. So they care about the facts. So they care about them and want to listen and they're curious about it. So here's where the facts come in and here's where the feelings come in. So again, this is hard in the workplace, but I'm going to give you 3 C's to help you remember how to make a connection. Help them to care about the information. Spark their curiosity and provide opportunities for them to communicate with you. Now, we often hear there's no such thing as too much communication during times of change, but usually it's a one-way communication, and that's good. We want to get lots of information out there, but are we providing times for them to communicate with us? Now, I told you I'm a bottom line person, so I'm going to give you ways to do this, how to do this. So let's talk about that. Emotional connection. I'm going to give you some ways called wake up call, hometown story, imagine that, fearless, and shoulder to cry on. I just have a bit of time, so I'll just be talking about these few. Let's jump right into this. So you've already thought about the change that you want to make and the outcome that you want, the change that you want to make and the outcome. And I ask you to think about that and perhaps write it down. And what some people call that is the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch. But you want to activate their curiosity and help them care about this pitch. Just because you're saying it doesn't mean they care about it. It also doesn't mean they want to hear more. They might say, oh yeah, please go away. I don't want to hear any more about this. So how can we make an emotional connection with them? I suggest that you add a pattern called wake up call. Many times, we're so excited about the solution, we forget to back up and talk about the problem. I actually saw this in a meeting recently where somebody had put a lot of work into preparing the meeting and to talk to people during the meeting about a change they wanted to make. Fabulous argument she was making, but people were just giving her one, but what if, but what if, but what if, after another. And it was another person, I'll never forget her name, Deborah, who stood up and said, look, what Kathy is talking about is offering a solution to a problem we have. And here's the problem we have. Now, we don't know that Kathy's solution is going to work, but we must deal with this problem. And people were reacting sort of like this. Oh. So what the presenter was doing was talking about the solution and didn't jump back to discuss the problem. And what wake up call can do is activate their curiosity. Oh, okay, we have a problem. Okay, let's go back. Tell us more about this solution. They may not agree to it. I don't want to assume this is magic, but at least they're more curious and care about listening. All right, so these two pictures, I'll just give you a minute to look at those two pictures and you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, when I see stuff like that, this is how I feel. I listen, and that's the facts, that's some data, and that's important to do when you're giving information about how Agile is performing or could perform. But compare it with this. Here's the data. here's the facts. Look at on the right. How much different do you feel when the information is given to you in that way? So I'm going to propose that the second pattern you add is a hometown story. I once had a personally saw this when I was given a presentation at a company on patterns and the use of patterns. And I had a dynamite presentation with wonderful slides. And by the way, I looked really good that day and I was so prepared and people were politely listening to me. And then this guy, Dave, stood up and said, oh yeah, I've used patterns. And I said, Dave, tell us your story. And he came up to the front and he leaned up against the desk and he told us his story. And I watched people's body language and eyes change. I was like, huh. But then I recognized that we need both. People were truly listening. They were asking questions. They were getting involved. So what stories can you tell about Agile? You still need the facts, but what stories can you tell? So stories. First of all, the human mind handles stories better than a collection of facts. Just remember that. The human mind can handle stories better than a collection of facts. It provides meaning, memory, and motivation for the facts. It helps people connect the dots in the information. It helps them enjoy listening. So that brings up the curiosity. That's one of the C words. Remember, care, curiosity, communicate. It helps them remember it. And it helps them repeat it. So you can imagine later when you have a lot of information, people don't necessarily remember it, but a story, they can go back and repeat it, perhaps at the dinner table that night. Or they can add to it. Yes, I want to tell you about my story. So that provides the communication, the two-way communication. And they can emotionally connect to it, which means they care more about a story and listening to a story as they did in the situation I said with Dave than they did to a lot of PowerPoint slides. So stories check off all three C's. Get people to care about it, get them curious, and get them to communicate their story. Now, this is actually a serious thing. There are books written on how to tell stories in organizations. And also, just a plug, we're having a Fearless Change Campfire in the beginning of October. And it's online, it's free, and I'll tell you more about it at the end. People are just going to come and tell their stories about making change happen. So, telling a story and asking for feedback and people adding to the story is good, but what about allowing people to create their own stories? Allow people to create their own stories. That's what the Imagine That pattern is all about. And this is an illustration from one of our books where the gentleman is standing and saying to people, what does our organization look like now? So people are giving themselves their own wake-up call. What does our organization look like now? Tell us. What kind of problems do we have? What kind of successes do we have? What kind of challenges do we have? So people, in the essence, are creating their own wake-up call that we talked about on a previous slide. Well, then he asks, how would our organization look if we, and this is where you want to think about what you want to do. If we did da 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 da. And people could say, oh, well, it could possibly do this, and this could happen, and that could happen, and this can happen. So they're telling their own story. This is when people ask me, what is your favorite pattern, Mary Lynn? I always say, Imagine That, because I've seen it used in such powerful ways when people can help people sit down and feel the possibilities, not just think about the possibilities, but actually feel the possibilities. Just imagine that when you have that kind of conversation with people. So it connects them. They are all communicating back and forth. This isn't a one way. So communication, it gets them curious as they hear what other people have to say and what they might think about. And it gets them to care more because they're giving their input. So it checks off all 3 C's. Now, I don't want to make this sound easy. There are going to be skeptics that no matter what say no, 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 no. And the thing about skeptics is that they fear you and you fear them. And you have this going on. You fear each other. So I'd like to propose that rather than ignoring them, or even worse, spending lots of time trying to convince them, which is what we tend to do, is just to sit and talk with them, to do a technique called peel the onion with them. Ask a question. So what problems do you see? And then ask another question based on that answer, and another question based on the next answer they give. And keep asking the questions based on the answers they give you. That's called peel the onion. And what you're going to do is find out that they have a piece of the puzzle that's missing. You're so excited about this Agile stuff that you're looking at it through what we call rose-colored glasses. The world is fine. Agile's going to make everything wonderful. And they're thinking of things that could go wrong. So they're going to give you a piece of the puzzle you don't have. We even have a technique called champion skeptic. If you find somebody that's a skeptic who complains, not just to complain, but complains because they want to make things better, you can make them a champion skeptic and invite them to your team meetings. In fact, go to them before you have to give a report. This is one of my favorite stories about a champion skeptic. Somebody said, oh yeah, we go to them before we have to give a progress report and we ask them what's missing in the progress report before we go and give that report. They've told us what's missing. One person said, yes, they made me the champion skeptic and I found that it's no longer fun to complain. So this again checks off the communicate and care and probably curious, because skeptics are going to wonder, why are you asking me for my opinion? So it checks off all 3 C's. And finally, the last one I want to give you is shoulder to cry on. When we're excited about a change, we tend to talk about what people will gain. Well, so, Kathy, why don't you like this? This is the great things that are going to happen. Fred, why don't you like this? These are the great things that are going to happen. Amy, these are the great things. But people are thinking about what they're going to lose. So rather than asking them only, what do you think about? What about if we also took it to the next step and said, how do you feel about? Ask them what they think about and how do you feel about. That opens the line of communication. And they're going to probably get to the point of explaining what they feel they're going to lose in this process. So perhaps you can't do anything about what they're going to lose, but you can at least acknowledge it. They're going to lose their current reality and their identity and their lack of control too. So you can at least acknowledge it. That shows that you care, right? And it also checks off the communicate because they're communicating with you. So just to summarize, yes, you need to give people facts. I got it. I understand. That's the way they'll react. But perhaps there'll be people that'll say, but I don't agree. So that's when you need to work with how they feel about the facts. The 3 C's, help them become curious, give them opportunities to communicate with you so that they eventually care about the facts. And here's some of the ways I showed you. There are many more, but here's some of the ways I showed you. So This is not easy, but I like to end with this quote by my famous poet, Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So I hope helped you feel better today about the possibilities of creating an emotional connection with people. If you want to know more about Fearless Change and the upcoming campfire, it's online, it's free. There's our website, there's our email and Twitter. And I encourage you to look at these patterns and take a baby step. That's another pattern we have, and each baby step take a time for reflection. So if you have any questions, I love, like I said, talking about change. So fire away.
Thank you very much. And I have a question, the first one so far, until somebody started asking as well, right? So what was the most difficult change you need to overcome yourself?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
What was the most difficult change you need to overcome yourself as a person?
Oh, as a person. Yeah, so I recently left my job, just like our previous speaker was saying. I left my job and I decided to go full-time with Fearless Change, and that was an extreme leap of faith. And what I found was interesting during this is people have been telling us for many, many, many years that the patterns that we have also work for personal change. And I believe it because I've used them many times. But guess what? It's true because I use the patterns for this huge personal change that I recently made, and gave myself a wake-up call, took a baby step, made a concrete action plan, took time for reflection, did a lot of imagining. And so, yeah, that's a very recent thing. So thanks for asking.
Nice. I'm really glad you're using your own thing that seems to be really consistent with the values and everything. So if you look into like organizational, work-based organizations, right, their cultures, etc., they very often are struggling embracing change. What they are missing the most?
What are they missing the most? I truly believe from the countless interviews that we did, that they tend to think about the change they're going to make first, which is good, but they just involve themselves and consume themselves with that change we're going to make, and then think that that the people are going to get on board because it is such a marvelous thing. So they think about the people second. And in fact, they think about the people too late rather than all along the process, and involving the people with constant communication. So I think that's the biggest mistake people make.
Mm-hmm. And how you help them to see that? What is a trick like we can use, when organization is pushing some change without communicating, without taking care of people? So what shall we do when we are in different roles in organizations, right?
Well, I don't blame them. People are complicated entities, and a person doesn't react the same way every day. You think, okay, they got it, and then the next day something else happens. So working with the people was a lot harder than working with the technology or the processes. I get that. So that's why you have to take it one baby step at a time. So that picture of the tools in the toolbox, so you get your collection of tools, your collection of patterns, and you're looking at the problem that you face today with the people. This is what's facing me right now. So often when I'm talking to people who are C-level people, CEOs or CIOs, they have this strategic plan, which is great. They have a strategic plan. And then often as they get down the road, the strategic plan will blow up at least in one place because they haven't thought about the people. And so the strategic plan is fine, but the idea that with the people, you must take a baby step, use a tool in your toolbox of patterns, and then take time for reflection, and then use another tool depending on the problem that's facing you today, and then take time for reflection, and then use another pattern and take time for reflection. So I think that people become overwhelmed, the leaders become overwhelmed at this massive task of dealing with these people, rather than just looking at, okay, this is what's facing me today, and I'm going to dig through my toolbox of patterns, and this is the one I'm going to use today, and then take time for reflection to see how it worked and what I should do next.
So they're like trying different things and can't really focus, right? I can imagine that, yeah.
Well, it's the idea they think of the big problem and they become overwhelmed with it, rather than looking at it, dividing it up into smaller problems, and then pulling out the pattern that will help with that. So what's facing you today?
So when they asked me about like what I would like to change and introduce that change, right? I thought something about building trust, raising a transparency, etc., right? But then when I thought about it, it's very abstract for many people. And so what would you recommend for those of us who want to change the culture of the organization and having those vision of people collaborating and things like that, right? Like where would you, which patterns would you start? How would you communicate such a change? And
yes, so change happens one person at a time. So when you're talking about changing a culture, or you're talking about these big things that you just mentioned, you have to remember change happens one person at a time. So when we started doing fearless change presentations, many times the organizations would ask us to build some kind of flow chart that said, this is what you do first, and this is what you do second, and this is what you do third, of all the patterns that we have. And we gave a lot of pushback, to steal a word that I had in the presentation. We said, we can't do that because it depends on what particular problems are facing you, the micro problems that are facing you that create the bigger problems. Mm-hmm. So tell me about the problem that you have today. If you had to describe what the situation is today, right now, in this time zone 0, mm-hmm. I could give you the pattern to address that. So, and what you use next then depends on the problem that you're facing next. So looking at change as this big thing, like I want to change the culture and create a culture of trust, you know, that's just so large. You've got to divide everything up into the micro problems that are creating that. For example, one of the things that may be creating that is that people don't trust the person who's leading a particular initiative. And you're recognizing that. And you go, well, wow, people aren't trusting that person who's leading the initiative. Now, of course, you always have the option of replacing that person, or you can use the patterns that are helpful for creating that trust. And there's things like holding a town hall meeting, or having brown bags at lunchtime where you just ask everybody to bring their lunch and talk back and forth, or personal touch where you talk to people not about how this change, Agile, is going to help the organization, but you can talk about how it's going to help each person, Jenny, Klaus, Pavel, you know, how they can help that particular person. So that's an example of starting with one particular micro problem that you have on this big quest for cultural change.
Thank you. Thorsten is asking if you can provide a short example for one common pattern.
A short example for one common pattern. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me think about one that I didn't use today. I like the pattern also. There's so many. Well, let's go back. I'm going to go back to that wake-up call pattern, because I once saw a team of people when we were doing the interviews who were, it was a customer service team. Now, these patterns, of course, work for any change. And the leader did not feel that the customer service team was working as well as they could. The problem was, so the big change was he wanted to change and get them to work better and be more productive. That's huge. I mean, that's huge. So what he started with was the wake-up call pattern. But he didn't come in and say, look, here's the problem we have, because they would have said, no, we're fine. Instead, he got them all together and used a little bit of imagine that and said, okay, so here's where we are. Let's talk about where we are. And they all talked and they were just very happy with how things were going. And he said, well, what if we wanted to get better? What would that look like? Just hypothetically, what if we wanted to get better? And suddenly they realized through the discussion that they could get better. And so then, to make a long story short, this just didn't happen overnight, but they started creating their own goals and things to strive for. So again, he wasn't telling them anything. He was allowing them to create their own wake-up call through imagine that. And throughout that process, they had a lot of brown bags, which is another pattern where they sat at lunchtime or over food, just in a very relaxed atmosphere, and talked about possibilities. And they also occasionally held big town hall meetings where they all talked together. And so this was a collection of patterns that they used all along in the process of trying to get the customer service team to improve. So that's an example. I know that for one, but these patterns never work by themselves. They always work together. Just like the tools in a toolbox, if you want to build a house, you don't just use a hammer. A hammer is useful for one thing, one problem. But you also need a drill, you also need a paintbrush, you need all these other tools. So they all work together. So it's really hard to talk about one pattern without talking about others and how they work together.
Well, that's good. We like stories, we like examples, so that's all great. I have another question from Jenny here. She said one of the biggest changes facing a lot of us now is a hybrid working. So we are working with individuals and teams to define what that might look like. So are there any patterns you'd like to suggest to support that work?
Yeah, so remember that when I talked about emotional connection, I said emotional connection is harder in the workplace than it is, of course, in your personal life when you have problems and you want to make an emotional connection with somebody. Well, step that up a bit. It's even harder when we're all online and we're not seeing each other. And so also the problem is people are tired of being online. I know I started thinking after a while that my eyes were just not as good because I was online so much. But a lot of these techniques can still work online. But let me be clear, not as well as they work in person. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use them. For example, the brown bag that I talked about, I bet all of you have tried this, where you've had perhaps a happy hour on Fridays or something like that, where everybody brought their favorite snack or beverage, and there wasn't any set agenda, and you talked about the problems and some of the solutions. So some of these patterns, as you read them, you can look at them and say, they would work a lot better in person. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try them online, because eventually we're going to all get back together in person. So I encourage you to think about how some of these things might still be implemented online, but not give up. Just recognize they don't work as well online, because we're talking about creating a connection with people, and connections don't work as well online, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't at least do as best we can.
So what do you think is a future which is like upcoming regarding this working online or virtual hybrid or going slowly back to face-to-face? So where do you think majority of the organization lands? What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I only know what I'm seeing. I know that my daughter, who works in Washington, D.C., says that they recently made her position 100% online. And of course, she has mixed feelings about that, because I'm hearing among the younger generation, which is her in her 30s, in her late 30s, she's thinking more about how does this affect my career when I'm not in the office making connections with people. And whereas people that are older, okay, I'll say myself, working online is not as scary. I've built my career throughout this. So I think there is going to be more pushback from younger people. I think there's going to be less pushback from people that are more my age. But I think that what we did is we did an experiment, right? So we were forced to take a baby step, and now we're doing the time for reflection, except it wasn't much of a baby step. We were forced to do it when we all went online. And now we're using another pattern called time for reflection and deciding, okay, now that we tried this experiment, how's it going to work for all of us? I'm personally really thrilled about it because it gives us another option for the way we work.
I hear a lot of people talking recently about it brings also a lot of stress to people, and that they are overworked and overworked and burning out and quitting their jobs, by the way. I hear it not just from two of you, but actually from many people around me. So what are your thoughts on this? Like, what would you recommend individuals maybe to sustain that change and stay healthy and energetic and don't burn out?
Well, usually when I do longer presentations, I have people dance in the presentations and move. Now, dance is in quotes because I'm not a very good dancer, but I love music. And I would have included it in this presentation if it had been longer, not the dancing, but I was going to include some music, but I realized I would have gone over. But the idea that we do things that are out of the ordinary. So during the pandemic, I personally, because I was sitting in front of the computer too much, and like I said, I was even worried that my eyes were having problems, I took up physically moving to music. And so I actually teach a class on this on Thursdays, where people, after sitting all day, they can join the class and just crazy dance. And we all dance together. So I know that sounds trite, but I'm telling you, it really works. I've heard some amazing stories from people who change the way they think about dance and movement, using it as not, oh, I got to get this move exactly right, because that's stressful. Just like I want to move and I want to relieve my stress and act silly, not act like an adult like I did when I was working all day, but act silly and relieve stress. So I would argue that our work is in front of us, our home life is in front of us. Why not try something different and perhaps a little silly? Maybe it's meditation, but something different. So that's my suggestion for changing yourself.
And that's scary, right? Be different than it's expected from me.
Yes.
Change those type of things. So what do you do with that fear? Yourself, and what can we do with that fear?
Yeah, and
people think I'm crazy, right?
Yeah, and dancing is a good example of fear. People, for some reason, have a lot of, and all dancing is moving, which you do every day when you get up out of bed, you move, but it's moving to music, which is a lot more fun than moving without music. So it gets people over that fear that, oh, I can't do anything different than what I'm doing.
So how did you come to change? Like, what brought you to speaking about change? What is this calling which you have?
Yeah.
Where are you coming from?
Well, that's a great story. I'm glad you asked that. I was in, my degree is in computer science. So I was a programmer, and then I became an educator. And I was at a conference in Arizona in the United States, and I met Linda Rising. And she and I started talking about, why is it that we have all this great technology and then we bring it to the users and they don't want to change, they don't want to use it. And we run into all these problems. And we sat for hours talking about this, and people were listening to us saying, you too should write a book. And of course, we hardly knew each other. We had just met. She lived in Arizona. At the time, I lived in North Carolina, where I still live. And, but to make a long story short, we talked more about it and said, look, but the way we want to write the book is not about a bunch of theory or a bunch of high strategic level things. There are plenty of great books on that. We want to write by going out and talking to people. So once we started doing that, just traveling and going to different organizations of different sizes and different countries and different kinds of people, it became lots of fun and pulling out the patterns that they used. And so that was somewhere in the late 1990s, and we haven't stopped. So we have 2 books, but you can also see we're continuing things on the website too that I gave you.
Nice, nice. So our time is slowly getting down to my last question. What is the one thing people should remember from today?
Okay, the one thing people should remember from today is, in addition to that great elevator pitch or those great PowerPoint slides, those are the kind of things we learn in school, and we're probably very good at it. All of you are probably very good at giving the facts to people and organizing them well. But you may want to think about jumping out of your comfort zone and thinking about, how can I help people to care about the facts? Care about the facts. So you can give the facts all you want, but you've got to try to find a way to get them to care about the facts. And so I gave you some techniques today. There are many others. And so that's my number one takeaway.